I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. If you are a listener of this podcast, you know the angelic voice of Kara Levchenko. Her voice has counterbalanced many heated political conversations on the podcast. Her rendition of Bring Me Little Water, Sylvie turned down the ratchet and centered many an episode. On June 30th, after 3 years of work, Kara Levchenko is out with her very first album, Letters to Myself, a pop music exploration of her loves, won, lost, unrequited, imperfect, and growing, all with catchy tunes. If all art is biographical, this album, by Kara's own admission, is her story up until now. Kara Levchenko grew up in Montgomery County, went to Northwest High School, and until recently worked as a choir teacher in Centerville High School in Northern Virginia. Lots of her music on the show and a portrait of the artist. Stick around.
Always starts with something simple. No one has to know. Stolen glances from across the room.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Kara Levchenko's debut album, Letters to Myself. Kara's band, TMI, provided backing music on some tracks. Will Stutzman played guitar and bass on some others. And backing vocals on yet other songs came from Joshua M. Fisher and Lex Bowler, who also produced and mixed the album. We have never had to say this on the pod before, but this episode comes with a listening advisory. Some of Kara's songs have explicit lyrics. If you have children listening, you may like to listen at another time, depending on how old they are and what your house rules are.
Yeah, I should tell you, boy, I want you like you wouldn't believe. If only for a night, tell me, would you do me right? I can see by the look in your eyes that something's got you hypnotized. If only for the night, tell me, would you do me right? I can feel your lips on mine. Boy, you got me hypnotized. Ooh, no, yeah.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I am Sunil Dasgupta. In the news this week, Montgomery County is about to pass a permanent countywide rent control law, which, even a few years ago, was thought to be impossible. Increasing housing costs, the pandemic, and change in the composition of the county council opened a path to this contested policy. The new rent bill, called the Home Act, will restrict annual rent increase in Montgomery County to the Consumer Price Index plus 3% of the previous year's rent, with a hard cap of no more than 6%. The bill also allows a 15-year exemption for new construction and allows rents to be raised when tenants turn over. A previous version of the bill would have controlled rent through the vacancy as well. In the United States, rent laws are justified by emergency conditions, starting first in World War I. Over time, they have also been justified by the emergency condition of housing shortage itself. In Montgomery County, county-wide rent control was first introduced during the pandemic emergency, and the effort currently underway seeks to make that change permanent. The standard for when a local or state government can impose rent control is subject to legal debate. Though price controls of any sort are subject to debate over the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment, there have not been any serious tests of this for some time. Instead, the courts have generally upheld rent control measures if the laws allowed landlords to make a fair return on investment. And there is some sort of industry standard for this, but those standards seem highly contestable. The legal argument is based in part on public good. On the one hand, rapidly rising rents make residents housing burdened and possibly homeless. This is an issue most important for lower income residents and arises from the mismatch in wage and rent between the labor and housing markets. On the other hand, opponents of rent control have found that rent control laws discourage investment in new housing because businesses don't like the government telling them how much they can charge. This is not just a matter of developers wanting to make more money, but rather not being able to secure financing for new projects from banks and hedge funds based on projections of rent income when restrictions are in place. The slowdown in building activity reduces supply of housing in the market, pushes up home values and rents, defeating the very purpose of controlling rent. Further, controlled housing units are usually cornered by well-educated and the relatively better off instead of going to the lowest income families. Lastly, rent control encourages landlords at the lowest end of the rental market to neglect maintenance and upgrades of controlled properties because of lowered income expectations. Almost all jurisdictions with rent control have a problem enforcing livability standards in rent-controlled units. Montgomery County's proposed new law exempts new construction from rent control for 15 years. This exemption for new construction addresses the criticism that rent control discourages new investment by allowing a period during which a new building owner can charge market rate rents. The 15-year period is considered to be a safe bet because most building mortgages end before then, and the initial developers generally sell off their interest in a building and move on to new projects. The looming shadow of rent control, of course, means that what the building sells for in 15 years will include a rent control discount. And working backwards, this means that rents in the first 15 years would likely increase. So, market rents would increase now in order to protect sale income later, thereby widening housing inequality. There is a provision in the law that allows building owners to get a fair return, but the calculation around it, including the exclusion of capital costs and depreciation factors, makes the proposition highly speculative. Developers and apartment building owners in the county have argued strongly against the new law, but incredibly, they have failed to stop it as they had in past decades. Only the city of Tacoma Park in the county has historically had rent control going back to a 1981 law. The imminent passage of rent control marks the improbable victory of low-income residents in a political contest against wealthier developers and building owners. In effect, it reverses our ordinary understanding of money in politics. Money, it turns out, is not always the most important determinant in political outcomes. I'd even say that in Montgomery County now, developers and building owners are not organized enough to get their way. To the contrary, developers have faced several reversals in 2023 alone. Increase in property taxes, increase in recordation taxes when properties are sold, and increase in impact taxes, though that is an automatic thing. Developers have opposed all three of these tax increases, but to no avail. There is little doubt that development interests are a major force in local politics, not just in Montgomery County, but across the United States. However, at this moment in time, development interests are finding it hard to win favorable political outcomes at a scale. Why this should be is an interesting question in itself, and I will definitely revisit this at length with an appropriate guest. Meanwhile, if you have thoughts on this, please send us an email at producer@ihppod.org or reach out on Twitter at IHPpod. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Kara Levchenko, the voice of I Hate Politics candidate interviews, who has just released her first album.
I'd say that it's only a matter of time before I wash away the fear that we'll never align. But I'd be lying through my teeth if I said that to you. No, I can't, I won't do it again. I know what I've got to do. Oh, heart, don't fail me now.
Kara Levchenko, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure, you are the voice of I Hate Politics candidate interviews. And how would I miss your first album?
It's something I've always dreamed about doing, but honestly didn't think was possible for me. For whatever reason, I always had an excuse, like I was too busy to be writing songs, or why would I put out an album? I already have a career as a teacher. And so, yeah, there were a lot of reasons that I put it off, but I'm so happy that I finally did it.
How long have you been teaching?
So I've been teaching for 6 years as a public school music teacher, mainly high school. I had a brief intermission from high school to teach elementary school when I moved to the DC area.
I bet your students are excited.
Yeah, they have actually been super supportive. My high schoolers that I finished out the school year with just a few weeks ago were telling me how much they liked all of my new releases, and they knew the lyrics, and they really wanted me to put the lyrics on Spotify. A couple of them even asked for the chords so they could play along and sing at home on their guitar. So that was really cool.
That's fantastic. I mean, you have a ready-made army.
Yeah, it does feel that way.
You are a storyteller. What is the story you're telling?
Yeah, so the story is, it's called Letters to Myself, and that's because all of these songs I wrote after I had an experience with somebody else. So each song is inspired by someone that I knew really closely, whether it was a really good friend, someone I was collaborating with, but for the most part, they're all kind of about relationships, romantic relationships, and me reflecting on those experiences.
So as you're writing, you said you write you write on piano. Lyrics first or music first?
Yeah, I wondered the same before I started writing music. I was like, how do people do that? Even though I've studied music, I'm a music teacher. I studied music classically and formally, music theory, music history, all that. But I really think that songwriting is so different. And that even though I did have that music theory background, nothing could have prepared me for writing my own lyrics and my own melodies.
Why not? I mean, after all, college is supposed to prepare you for life.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
No, but I mean, we have this conversation all the time for
Sure.
all kinds of disciplines, but almost never for art, an art-related discipline. So tell me, what is this gap?
I've stepped back from public teaching. I'll be teaching in a private school part-time next year, teaching choir and private lessons, and running vocals for their musical. But I just had to take a step back from formal public education because it is just so incredibly disconnected from the music we experience and write and dance to and sing to in our daily lives. And it goes beyond just the fact that we promote a lot of classical music that was written for and by wealthier, privileged white folks. And that's kind of just our narrative. It's the canon of music education that we have here in the States.
So you are saying that public school music education is disconnected, but private school music education is more connected to what's going on now?
I hesitate to make a large generalization like that, but I have worked in 3 different districts at 3 different schools. So I think I've gotten a good scope of the high school choral education kind of sphere. In terms of the private school, a big reason that I went there for my next position, and I haven't started there yet, so TBD on how that goes. But on the whole, I think when you're dealing with private schools, you're dealing with schools that make their own philosophies and their own rules. Whereas with a public school, there's a lot of things you have to do that come from above, and all of the schools have to follow that mindset and that canon. So it's a little bit different. There's more freedom, I think, in the private school setting. So depending what school you work at, of course, because they're all vastly different, you could have more of a connected experience for the kids where they're getting to sing music from their own cultures, music that they're really interested in, and even doing things like songwriting if they want to do that. I believe that they should learn that in public school if that's something they're interested in doing. I wish that I learned it in public school.
You went to public school, right?
I did, yeah.
And you went to Montgomery County Public Schools.
Yes, Montgomery County, Northwest High School. Yep.
All right. So shout out to Northwest here.
Shout out.
I was listening to your album today, and I particularly like Patiently.
Me too. That's one of my favorites.
Let's take a listen.
They fill my mind. Lonely heart, is this the start? Falling for you over again. Thought you left my heart for good, but then you know me better than I do. Wish that I could erase you. They said you'd be gone by now. I'm waiting patiently. Every thought leads back to you. Doesn't matter what I do, I still smell your favorite cologne. Open my eyes and I'm still alone. Feel you fading.
That's almost halfway through the record at that point. The time when the record sort of shifts is with Ego. So Ego comes after Patiently. Patiently is saying, when will I meet somebody again? When will I feel better again? Like I can meet someone and be open to that. And Ego is a little bit about that. So Like I said, Ego's the first one that I wrote, but it was inspired by a relationship that I had right before COVID, where I was sort of casually dating someone. I just moved to the area. They were very charismatic, very fun. And I think, like a lot of narcissists tend to appear, they seemed like a really fun person to be around, life of the party. Yeah, and it became very obvious the more time we spent together, especially in isolation during COVID, that this person was really just mentally not well. And they were taking that struggle out on me and out on their loved ones. And it became a very toxic environment.
Here is Ego by Levchenko.
Saw you on my screen, figured I'd bite. At first you're charming, say you're not like the others. Then I find out your ex, well, you still love her. I knew me before you knew me. I hurt me before you hurt me. I'm numb to the pain, to you it's a shame. I'm not who I need to be, though. Like you, working on my ego. Ain't got time to heal you. Words a person to do. While we talk, I see your eyes shine. Got me thinking maybe it's different this time. But there you go again, slamming the door. Then I realize I think that, babe, I've met you before. I knew me before you knew me. I hurt me before you hurt me. I'm numb to the pain, to you it's a shame. I'm not who I need to be, though. Like you, working on my ego. Ain't got time to heal you. Words a person to do.
Ego is really the story of me thinking not only I'm definitely in a toxic relationship, but why am I in one, right? I think a lot of the time we tend to victimize ourselves, and it can be really hard to ask yourself what role you play in your own suffering. So that song is really about that. It's like, hey, not only was I in this toxic experience, but I put myself in that experience and I stayed in that relationship for a long time. And why was that? Why did it take me so long to get out of it? And so that's a really, it's a tough song to talk about, but it was an easy song to write because it was just so real. So that's Ego.
Well, we have, especially among our youth today, a huge challenge of mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you say, what role do we play in our own suffering? It brings home the point that in part, we may also be responsible for where we put ourselves in terms of mental health. That's always a very difficult thing to say. Do you think your song can help, particularly young people, move forward?
I do think so. I think if I had heard a song like that I would feel seen. And I did even have several students. I released this song first. It was the first song of mine ever that I put on Spotify and all the streaming services. And I released it in the fall, knowing that the album was coming this summer. But all year, I had students coming up to me telling me how much that song meant to them. And for some of them, it reminded them of relationships. Others, it reminded them of friendships or even family members. But they seemed to really connect with it and take something from it. So I think for sure.
In order to be able to record an album, you have to raise money. What did you do?
I think as a musician, as a creative, in order to make that your life, you have to be shamelessly asking for money and being okay with people saying no. Because if people say yes, that can make all the difference for you. So I became totally okay with asking people for donations. I created a GoFundMe. I actually made $1,500 on that GoFundMe, which was amazing.
And so how much does an album cost?
So one song is close to, $600. And I had 9 songs, but I actually did an additional song for my mom too. So it was a lot.
So you spent about 6,000, of which you were able to raise about 1,500.
Correct. And I also took a lot of side jobs too to make ends meet. So I was teaching, and I still am teaching piano lessons to elementary schoolers through a nonprofit program in Arlington. With Arlington Presbyterian Church, where kids in low-income housing, kids who normally could not afford something like a private instruction music lesson, which are very pricey, they were able to take those lessons for free, but the church received a grant, and then they were able to pay the teachers, professional musicians. So a great program that I was able to raise money for myself through.
Yeah, so the amount of hustling that is required to get your first album out, almost takes the romance out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it took up my whole life. It was the most important thing to me, and I think that I thought there would be a point where I was like, oh, I just want it to be over. Like, I just can't wait to put it out there and like, it's whatever. But in fact, that never really happened. Like, I loved every minute of making it. And even when it was stressful, I still loved it. And now that it's out, I feel like it's just the beginning of putting my music out, because now it's out for people to find, right? But how is someone going to find it? They're going to have to find me somehow. So, that's going to involve a lot of performing live gigs, solo gigs by myself, which I've just started kind of doing, and just trying to get the word out that my music is out there, and so that it can reach ears for people who want to hear it.
Right. And the economics of streaming don't work at all. I mean, they just...
No. Yeah. If you have a song with less than 1,000 streams, it's pretty unlikely that would get added to somebody's daily mix that Spotify makes, and of course there are other streaming services, but honestly, Spotify is the one I'm most familiar with, and I think it's the most popular. So that's kind of the one that I look into a lot. But yeah, if you have over 1,000 streams, if you have collaborations with other artists, and if you're active as a musician, you're putting things out every now and again, then you stay relevant. And then there's traction. People keep wanting to hear you. But if you put out a project and then don't do anything for a year, I think it's safe to say, like, probably not much is going to happen with that.
What is your relationship with Taylor Swift? I mean, what do you think of her music? How have you grown up with it?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting you say that. Taylor Swift was one of my favorite artists in middle school, which is wild to me because middle schoolers are still listening to her, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But it's also awesome. And I definitely respect her a ton because she managed to stay relevant in a world where we often kind of just cancel women after they turn 30. We're like, oh, you're not young and hot anymore. Like, I don't really care about your music. We've seen that with a lot of musicians and actors, and it's a shame for sure, because I don't think the same is true of men. But Taylor Swift has really managed to break through that. And she's, over 30, but she's at the top of her game. Like, she is even stronger and more popular than she was in the past.
What kind of reminded me was this examination of self and love. And I use that separately. It's not like together. It is self and love, right? So it's a relationship between you and the idea of love in its various forms, right? And I find that is what Swift does a lot, and I found that in your music as I listened to it.
When I started the record, right, when I started Ego, that one definitely feels very much inspired by Taylor Swift. Like I said, I grew up listening to her. And she does write a lot about her experiences. And I had a lot of experiences to write about too. So I definitely took some inspiration from her, even down to like the recording and the production process. Like, I enjoyed a lot of the instruments that she used in her past albums. And so a lot of the ways that I was producing Ego was very similar to my influence.
Explain that a little.
Yeah. So for example, with Ego, it started like just a piano and my voice. And I had the chords that I liked that sounded good and in an order that I liked. It was different for the verse and the chorus. The chorus, the chords move twice as fast to keep it moving, which is very common in Taylor Swift's music as well. And when I went into the studio, I knew I wanted some upbeat guitar in there. So Lex, my producer, is insane, awesome producer. Shout out Lex. He was saying, okay, so do you want this to sound like a Taylor Swift song? And I thought, yeah, I kind of do. And so he brought that to it, right? Like he brought these electronic drums. We sat there and like listened to all these different drum sounds until we found one that was kind of like a soft pop kind of drum sound, right? And then we also added some guitar licks in there. We added this moving guitar line, and the strumming pattern he was using was very similar to a lot of Taylor Swift songs. She uses the same kind of guitar pattern. So yeah, it definitely happens in production, because when I sit down and write a song, that's just voice and chords. And not everybody writes that way, but that's how I write because of my music theory background and my background as a vocalist first and foremost. But when you're producing, it's all about what you want it to sound like. And you can go so many directions with how you want it to sound. So Ego is a great kind of it's like a shift, right? In the musical sound, for sure, because at the beginning of the record, you get 4 sort of acoustic, softer songs, kind of somber. The first one's more upbeat, but the next 3 are pretty sad. They're pretty emotional. And I think when we get to Ego, it's sort of picking up a little bit, and it's saying like, I'm recognizing this problem within myself and I want to fix that. And what's going to happen? What does that look like? After Ego is a song called Hypnotized. And that one is a really fun one, probably my favorite one to perform live. I love playing that one on guitar. It's a lot of fun. And that one was inspired by the connection you get with somebody where you might know this person already. You spend time with them already. They're kind of a friend. You have mutual friends. You're in like similar spaces together. This was actually inspired by someone that I played music with, formerly, not anymore, but that I used to play music with. And it was kind of that feeling of realizing like, do I like this person, or am I just lusting after this person really? Which I know is a common experience. And you're trying to sort of sort through like, is this just a crush? You know, is it more than a crush? Or are you just kind of bored and like sort of giving into your like inner monologue a little bit? Like it was all about the thought inside of lusting after somebody and what our brains do when we like someone, which is fill in the gaps that we don't know about them. And after Hypnotized is a song called Fuck You, Love You, which is explicit, you know, but that one is about the experience of being with somebody where you feel like you need them, which is a sort of a toxic dynamic for sure. But you're also just kind of angry at them. Like you love them, but you're angry at them too at the same time, which is a complex set of feelings to have. But that song I actually wrote with my best friend, India. And she wrote the last 3 songs on the record with me. So Fuck You, Love You, Sad Boy, and New Me. And you can definitely hear that in the sound because India and I are a songwriting duo. We're working on another project right now as well together. So I'm super excited about that and where that will go. But yeah, so she brought her sound into this one. It's much more hip hop than the previous ones. It's hard to describe the sound of Hypnotized, but I think it kind of leads into that more hip hop sound. And Fuck You, Love You started with just a loop of strings on Logic that me and India found together. We thought it was really pretty. And then we just started singing these harmonies that went like, fuck you, I love you, hate you, needed you. And we like layered that a ton. And then basically we just wrote a verse, and for the longest time, we couldn't figure out what the chorus of the song was, actually. So it didn't have a chorus for a while. It was just this one verse. And then we wrote a bridge, which is like this a cappella kind of choral stacking, because we're both choir nerds. We like grew up going to choir together in high school. And then I brought it to the band that I was playing with at the time, which is TMI. And they were like, we love this. This is such a cool song. And I was like, well, I'm recording it in January. Do you guys want to be on the track with me? For the record? And they were like, definitely. So we all practiced it. We kind of made it our own. The song definitely took a different turn when I gave it to the band. And I'm thinking about re-releasing it later on in completely different format. And I'm excited about that because it really did start as a totally different song than it ended up. But I love where it went. And I love where TMI took it. So so we brought this different flavor to the track. We had full band. We had rhythm guitar, lead guitar, bass, keys, drum set. And then we also had a rapper. And so the rapper Waleed in my band, he wrote the rap for Fuck You Love You in like 20 minutes.
Like a king having you there being my girl. Love had me blinded to the lies that you were weaving, my girl. So the best thing I can do is get to leaving, my girl. Call, no reply, call, why you ghosting me? I know that well true love ain't what it's supposed to be. But then again, it feels so good when you're close to me. Not cause of you and what you do, I'm losing hope for me. You see, you had me all caught in your whirlwind. Bad memories, good times, all in my mind swirling. My heart'll never start again until it's done hurting. And life has been fucked up from having you as my girlfriend. What?
Late night phone calls, giving my all talk, you stall, we hit a wall. Time ticking away, the price we pay. You ghost me all day, but then you say, I needed you.
Why do you feel the need to write letters to yourself?
I think it's my way of processing life and experiences. I think everyone has a different way of doing that. But that is the way that I process things. So I actually am a big journaler. I journal all the time. And I've been doing that my whole life. Ever since I could write, I was journaling. I was writing out the story of my life. And I still do it every time something happens. And then I go back and I read it and I reflect on it years later. Like I still do this where I'll read something from a long time ago that I wrote. And like sometimes I'll feel really inspired by how emotional that journal entry was that I write a song about an experience I had years before. So that's one way. But then, in terms of like Sad Boy, that I loved how that came together because it really felt like it was a journal entry, but it was a song. And it didn't come later. It came in the moment. Like I saw this guy with somebody else. He was flirting with somebody else and it like killed me. And I said, why is this killing me? We're not even in a relationship. We're not even together. And I was like, oh, because I have these strong feelings for him. I need to write about it right now before I lose this feeling. And I wrote about it immediately. Like the next day I started the song. And that really is a journal entry in music. That's almost where I got the idea to call the album Letters to Myself.
Thought I found someone I could roll with. Someone who gets what it's like to be on their own and shit. Holding out for the guy who loves me the way I love myself. But it's hard when you need someone else. I don't know why you're the one I go back to in my mind. I can see that it was for the best, but I still remember when I said goodbye to you, standing on some driveway crying. Now I do people everywhere, but to me it's only you. No, only you.
You end with this idea of, building a new persona, essentially, building a new self.
Yeah.
It seems also a little bit of a liberation story. And what are you liberating yourself from?
The common thread of all the songs and all the relationships and all the people, all the experiences is that I was putting myself second to these other people. I was putting what I needed second. I was putting what I love to do second. I wasn't prioritizing myself. And that's why I stayed in these relationships that were either toxic or that didn't bring me joy or, they just they didn't fit. Maybe they were fine. They were healthy. Like the first song on the record is Thank You. I don't regret that relationship. I wouldn't say I regret any of them, but I think that it was another learning opportunity where even though it was healthy, it still wasn't right. And listening to your intuition, even if you can't explain why you're having a certain intuition, is so important. And it's something that I really didn't know how to do for a long time. I thought this person's interested in me. This person's nice to me. Like that's all it takes. But since then, since writing New Me and since putting this record out there and reflecting on all of the stuff that led to it, I just kind of think to myself, I've really grown up, like, since I went through that stuff. And I don't think I would ever find myself in any situation like that again, like any of the songs on the album. I think that now I have a really good sense of self and I'm very comfortable by myself. I'm not looking to be with somebody else, or I'm not looking for someone to complete me because I'm complete on my own. And to have a great partner is to have someone who is also complete and doesn't need someone to complete them. And you just support each other through that. So I think it's a liberation of like being healthier as a person, following my intuition, not being afraid to completely cut off a person because they're not doing it for me. Like someone who is just unkind or disrespectful, goodbye. Nothing is worth that. I'd rather be alone than be with someone like that.
Well, that's a very 21st century thing, to be honest with you. I mean,
I know
people like me who were young in the 20th century, right? We have this thing, right? You finish my sentence, right? And the idea behind you finish my sentence is that I'm not completing my sentence.
Yeah.
So made for each other had a very different meaning 30, 40 years ago than it does for you.
It's true. It's true. A lot of women are choosing to get married later, to not have kids sometimes in some cases. And I'm also not straight. Even though this entire album is about my relationships with men, I've also had a lot of relationships with women. And I didn't include those on the album because they didn't really go with the story. But I do think that there's another story to be told with that, because I've grown up in a time where, when I was in high school, if you were gay and you were in the theater department, like you were probably a little more accepted, but on the whole, like it was still pretty unsafe to come out as being anything but straight when I was in high school. And now it's
when were
different.
you in high school?
When I was in high school. So I graduated senior year. It was 2013.
Okay. And you think in 2013, it was still not okay? I mean,
I do. Yeah, I do. And even as a teacher now, like I dealt with some kids who were being bullied. It was small. It was here and there, but I was shocked. I was like, it's 10 years later, it's 2023. And still, kids who are gay are being bullied. And that's wild to me because I had seen so much progress and I thought that things had gotten so much better. But it still happens, and I think when you're someone like me who's interested in anybody, regardless of gender, it's more like a soul connection, or I'll just meet somebody and we jive together, and it has less to do with their gender for me. So I identify as pansexual for that reason. But it's still a lot easier. Society makes it so that if I am with a man, I think it just makes things easier for me as a woman. And so it's hard for me to lean into that other part of myself. And that's definitely another album story for sure.
It is another album, but I'm a little bit surprised that that's not in this album, frankly, because, look at this moment right now in Montgomery County, we are having protests against the inclusion of LGBTQ books in MCPS.
Yeah.
There is the book bans in Florida. I mean, the moment is so rife, right? And so I'm a little bit surprised that part of you got left in your journal and, didn't come out in the album.
Well, frankly, too, Sunil, like that was a part of myself that I did continuously push down. And just didn't listen.
But you continue to do that for the album as well, then?
No, not necessarily. Like I said, a lot of the songs came from stories that happened before I wrote them. And, some of them were more recent. But it definitely felt like a story that had more to do with my experiences with men than it did my experiences with women. And I think the album would be more like 15, 16 songs if I included those too. And that would have been a lot more money, a lot more time. And I knew I wanted to put the project out. So I thought, let me save that whole journey and that whole story for another project, because there's a lot to say there. And I definitely have been holding it back.
Don't come up in here already acting like you know me. That bitch is gone, yeah she did, that's the old me. Yeah, don't assume that's a queen, can't dethrone me. Too much to own, yeah, you couldn't even afford me. Rich in energy, this pussy cleaning. Body tight, mind right, so hot, I'm steaming. get it, I'm hard to impress. This ain't checkers, it's chess, baby, I'm not stressed. You fucking with the best. Don't wanna lead you on. If I'm not for you, I'm gone. You gotta give me more, or I'm walking out the door. So lower the casket, that bitch departed. You don't really know what the fuck you just started. Made her the rest, she a ghost, she did to me.
You know, your songs really do appeal to people you teach.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that later. It's true. It's definitely true. Yeah, I've written some songs that haven't been about relationships, but I think on the whole, that's just what feels right to me in this moment. And also, it's only the beginning of me writing music and putting it out there. So who knows where it's going to go and what's going to happen next.
Well, selfishly, I hope you'll write something political.
I would love to get political in my music. There's a lot to say there.
Yeah, and when you do, please come out and share it with us.
Oh, absolutely.
Carol Levchenko, thank you for coming on the show. Good luck with the album.
Thank you so much, Sunil. Thank you for having me.
Standing in the doorway of your temporary room. Everyone's back from dinner, but couldn't end the night too soon. Now they're playing kings and drinking things I haven't had since freshman year. And we lock eyes, I realize neither of us wants to be here.
Congratulations, Kara. At I Hate Politics, we cover politics and society, of course, but we also love music, which has always been a tremendous escape hatch for me, as I imagine it is for many of you. Go listen to Carol Levchenko's first album, Letters to Myself, on Spotify. You can also buy the album on Bandcamp. The link is in the show notes. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org or reach out on Twitter @IHPpod. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics and sometimes music close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Where we sat drinking airplane bottles of whiskey, and you told me you don't know how to be alone, so I told you I could be your home. Then we're back in Virginia, but it's different somehow. Who we were last summer feels like just a memory now, but it felt too good to just let it go.